Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to this magnificent life. Thank you for being determined, curious, steadfast in your practice. Thank you for being a fellow Lotus Sutra Buddhist, following our modern master, our modern bodhisattva, our mentor, Nichiren. With that, let's get right into the Lankavatara, still in chapter 2, albeit on part 18 of that chapter. Well, let's just get into it. No preface. If you're new here, you would do well to try to capture the initial episodes of any of these series so that you don't get just dropped into the middle of something. It might be difficult to follow along. And if you're new here, I suspect either you're coming to Buddhism as completely uninitiated, in which case I encourage you to use the search function on this channel, not the YouTube search, but the search on the home page of this channel, right in the middle of the page there, well, off to one side, a little magnifying glass, and put in a search term like karma or chanting or Myoho Renge Kyo or whatever. I have lots and lots of videos on this channel that just deal with simple questions like that aren't deeply involved in reading sutras and commentary. They're just analysis of Buddhist concepts. And that would be a good place to start, I would think. If you're coming to this channel via Lotus Sutra, one of the many groups or organizations or sects where you may have looked into Lotus Sutra Buddhism, or even more specifically, a Nichiren-based school, although, anyway, we all know what opinions are. Everyone's got one, right? But there is a correct way to practice this Buddhism. This is Shakyamuni's Buddhism. He was very clear in what it meant, what it represented, and how to practice it. Nichiren is our modern day teacher, guidance. So it's really an independent practice. It's a practice that we must do ourselves. No one can give us any piece of enlightenment. We must achieve our own enlightenment. But as a group, as a sangha, we can share insights and experiences with one another, and that can greatly facilitate bringing about our own insights. So that's what this channel is about. Right now, this is a series of an early Mahayana Sutra, well before the Lotus Sutra, and yet it contains many Mahayana concepts, although not fully developed. The Lankavatara is elucidating of certain concepts that we're just expected to understand by the time we practice the Lotus Sutra. So this is a study channel, and we get to look at things from the standpoint of every benchmark throughout the teachings of Buddhism. Helps us learn, helps us see certain concepts that maybe when they're fully developed and expressed in the Lotus Sutra, there's a lot of assumed knowledge, right? Because this was taught like we teach all people, our children, and as well as adults in our public schools. Everything starts with basics and builds upon those concepts until we get to and arrive to the culminating teaching. And that always develops too. That's why Shakyamuni said, you must study all of Buddhist scholarship and non-Buddhist just to get your mind around how to achieve your enlightenment, your self-enlightenment, yeah? All right, let's get into it. I said no forward, and here I am doing it. Can't help myself. Further, Mahamati, those who, afraid of sufferings arising from the discriminations of birth and death, seek for nirvana, do not know that birth and death and nirvana are not to be separated, the one from the other. And seeing that all the things subject to discrimination have no reality, imagine that nirvana consists in the future annihilation of the senses and their fields. They are not aware, Mahamati, of the fact that nirvana is the alaya vijnana, where a revulsion takes place by self-realization. Therefore, Mahamati, those who are stupid talk of the trinity of vehicles and not of the state of mind only, where there are no images. Therefore, Mahamati, those who do not understand the teachings of the Tathagatas of the past, present, and future concerning the external world, which is of mind itself, cling to the notion that there is a world outside what is seen of the mind, and Mahamati go on rolling themselves along the wheel of birth and death. All right, so that paragraph, that paragraph is essential to understanding this Lankavatara. Again, we've talked about the mind-only translation here. But what is he really saying here? Again, we're stuck with the 8 consciousnesses. So nirvana is the alaya vijnana, where a revulsion, there's that word, takes place by self-realization. So let's look at that in terms of the Lotus Sutra, because it's not incorrect, but the verbiage, the depth of understanding of what's being said there is in fact what distinguishes our understanding of self-realization versus the Lankavatara. The Lankavatara struggles throughout with this idea of separating self-realization, revulsion of everything being constructed of mind. And I think it's in the language here where we can get tripped up. And this has been described better in earlier parts of this sutra, actually. But it doesn't stay focused on. It takes for granted that when Shakyamuni says mind only, he's not identifying the mind as a separate entity versus the universe, as it were. What he's saying in a shorthand is that it's our entanglements, our possession of thingifying and permanentizing things that is a result of the alaya vijnana. All our senses, all our consciousnesses, sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, so on, all the way through the mano consciousness and the alaya consciousness, we've discussed this before, is karmically constructed. It is energy formed into all of its various potentials, and our freight train, the Sylvain freight train of potentials that are manifesting, and your Bob, John, Betty, Aloysius, whatever name you give your bag of karma, moving through time, we are a momentum of instantiations, moment after moment. That self, and because that self is constructed of that energy, that karmic freight train, everything that karmic freight train perceives is perceived through the filters of that karma. I mean, totally makes sense, right? Right? What's that saying? How's that saying go? I never say this right. If you think yourself a hammer, then everything you see looks like a nail. I know I said that wrong, but still, you get the gist, right? If your karmic freight train has certain tendencies and conditions, then those tendencies and condition will be what your karmic freight train experiences everything as. So on a very fundamental level, everything is constructed of that mind that arises from your karmic freight train, that alaya consciousness. It's not incorrect. It's a very prescient observation that the way each of us experiences the world, the universe, which is our world, is a self-reflection of our myriad tendencies and conditions. And this is why, if you look up the fountain analogy video on this channel, you'll get that often discussed, or maybe not often, I don't know. When I was young, growing up, the fountain thing was in vogue. But basically, for those of you who don't want to take the time or haven't taken the time to see that video, 10 people see a fountain and later are questioned about it, and they all have a different impression, some subtle, some wildly different impressions of the fountain, if they even remember seeing it. That's just our self-natures, right? The nature, self-nature being the nature of that karmic freight train. So in that respect, everything that you and I in our respective freight trains views is constructed of the mind that arises from that freight train. Totally makes sense. What's missing in this particular section, paragraph, whatever, is that it isn't simply perceiving these constructs of chair, book, house, other. It's our entanglements with them. It's the entanglements, the passions, the possessing of, the containing of, the mirroring of our identity by virtue of labeling everything that's constructed of our tendencies and conditions. We make those things static. We forget that everything is happening moment to moment to moment to moment. So there's two things happening at the same time here. A realization that nothing is permanent. Everything is happening moment to moment, instantiating potential moment to moment. Conveniently, in our samsaric world, we can pick things up consistently, right, as solid and so forth, by virtue of the way energies form atoms and molecules and keep a consistent instantiation of form over time. Intellectually, we know that, yes, every time I go to pick up that chair is the chair, and I sit in that chair, and I put that chair here, and I put that chair here, like it's a permanent thing. But intellectually, we know that that chair didn't always exist, that it had to be made, constructed, that we have a mental idea and construction of the chair and what it's for and how it's made. We also intellectually know that it's made of perishable materials. It will wear out. It will degrade. And at some point in the future, either through my own doing or long after I'm gone, it will decay into its component molecules and reintegrate into dust and whatever. It will no longer be chair. We know this intellectually. But for the span of time we exist, are manifest, birth, death, moment to moment, manifesting this freight train of karma, that chair exists. But we have to shift our mind in order to understand that existing is a process, not a static thing. That's a perceptive shift, right? Understanding the chair is existing now, moment to moment. That it's constantly reinstantiating its form, albeit gradually disintegrating, arising, abiding, decaying, and ceasing. Everything does this. So that's a big mental perceptive shift and one to wrestle with, yes? So that's one main course of understanding in the teachings of Buddhism. The other parallel course that goes along with that, and it's intertwined with it, is also to understand, to perceive, that it is our desire, our craving to have that chair. Even to have that chair to sit on, to have that chair as a thing we see, to have that chair to see other people sit on, our craving in every form, manifestation of craving, which comes from where? This freight train of karma, wants to have that chair be there. We're making it permanent, and we're actually identifying our very self with the identification of that chair. In some small additive process, everything we do that to, chair, wall, food, bed, person, whatever, becomes a mirror or a validation of the thing we're calling a self. And if that chair doesn't exist, then we lose a little part of ourself. What is that? That's the entanglement. That's the passion. That's the craving to maintain status quo. You've heard it said all your life, people resist change. People don't like change. Yeah, it's that karmic desire to hold on to. Because through that holding on to, we somehow identify ourselves. And so you've heard it 1,000 different ways in Buddhism. Self and environment. Environment reflects self. Self is not separate from our environment. Our environment actually is created by this idea of self. That's where all this comes from. So there's these two parallel things. There's understanding that everything we experience is a creation of our own experience, that facility we have of mind. The mind isn't a separate entity. The mind is an emergent property of this karmic freight train. So it too is instantiating moment to moment to moment to moment. That's why you can change your mind, because in the next moment you can instantiate that mind with new influences, new information, new understanding. But there is the tripwire in that mechanism of further attachment. Attachment even to ideas. So we must be ever vigilant to watch what our mind is doing. This is where the ninth consciousness comes in, but it's not here in the Lankavatara, identifying Buddha-ness as that clear and free process that can only be witnessed, experienced via this emergent mind. So that also represents two tracks of thinking. And this is what we're seeing here, struggling in this latest paragraph, section, is this self-realization being in the alaya consciousness it's kind of shoehorned in there. But what it says is absolutely valid. What it actually says, again, from the perspective of a Lotus Sutra Buddhist practitioner, we understand that it is in this very samsaric soup of entanglements and identification, although knowing it's all constructed, it doesn't mean it's annihilated when we get our aha moment. It doesn't mean that it's all invalid. What it does present to us is an apparatus, the whole of it, not just this body, but this body, universe body, the entirety of thingness, because it emerges a mind that can witness, that isn't a particular entity, though itself is constructed, it is free of the construction if we choose to change its perceptive existence to one of equanimity, to one of realization that everything is a moment-to-moment expression of life, all of life. That everything isn't individuated, that it's all just expression of life, happening in myriad forms, representing this potential to experience life that emerges a mind to witness it. This is kind of a circular thing. But this mind can only exist as the emergence of consciousness, a certain kind of consciousness, of this whole process we call life. And it is that mind, that facility of mind, that provides the light in the attic, so to speak, of revisiting, re-evaluating, experiencing moment to moment this glorious life in all of its manifestations as the same process. Equanimity. Non-distinguished, not identified, simply being all of it's like a dance, yes? That experience is Buddhahood. That mindful experience, that experience of the mind, which is the only place experience can happen, is Buddha-ness. Because without this experience, what use would a label be? If no sentient mind were to emerge in this universe, who would be there to give a crap? Who would need to understand Buddhism? What purpose would Buddhism have? So Buddha isn't something outside of this life experience, this constructed freight train of karmic expression and all of its identification, is very much a product of the same life that the realization that everything is moment-to-moment instantiation of potential. It's all the same. You wouldn't be able to perceive Buddha-ness were it not for all of this manifestation. So that's what this means. Do you see? That enlightenment, Buddha-ness, is not a separate thing outside of this samsaric experience. In fact, it is only in this samsaric experience that emerges this mind, this witness, where Buddha-ness can be achieved. I hope that makes sense. However, the Lanka is still identifying the alaya vijnana, which is the freight train of karma, right, as the producer of the mentations, the mind of attachment, or the mind-only realization. The words kind of muddy it up, but we understand, right? Further, Mahamadi, according to the teaching of the Tathagatas of the past, present, and future, all things are unborn. In other words, everything is a manifestation, moment to moment, of this complex, vastly complex energies in their tendencies and conditions forming, becoming form, manifesting moment to moment to moment. So truly, there's nothing that is born in the sense that it goes through a process of being a permanent thing, a this or a that. That everything is just sparks, just moments of thisness, suchness. Right? It's like, and here we go with another bad analogy. It's like water. If you freeze it, it's hard. If you boil it, it's a vapor. If you keep boiling it, it becomes steam. There's these phase changes to everything: steel, aluminum, grass, flesh, whatever. Like water, it instantiates in different forms depending upon tendencies and conditions. There it is again. So, is the ice cube born? I mean, language is screwy, right? We can say, well, the ice cubes are born of water and temperature and so on and so forth. We could say that, but what we're identifying is a process, right? We can't snap our fingers and ice cube appears. So that's what he means by born, a self-created entity. Nothing is born in that sense. Everything is a process. And we try to impose on the experience, this ice cube is real and itself, and there it is slowly melting, when in fact what we're watching is a process that brought about the ice cube and is now sitting on the table in a different tendencies and conditions of temperature and so forth, watching it decay and melt, and at some point there will be water and no ice cube. It ceased being ice cube, because the being is a moment-to-moment instantiation of a process. Why? He says, because they have no reality. Being manifestations of mind itself, this is that great leap. Again, defining that it's a perceptive entanglement that we're wrestling with. A perceptive identification problem that we have with making things permanent, born, or dying, without understanding that everything is a process. And Mahamati, as they are not born of being and non-being, they are unborn. See the wording trying to identify this understanding? It's very confounding, isn't it? Mahamati, all things are like the horns of a hare. Why does he keep using that example? Because a rabbit, doesn't have horns. But we can imagine horns on a rabbit. And that is a mental creation. And so Shakyamuni is saying, just like you can imagine the horns on a rabbit, so too is everything you experience an imagined thing. It's kind of a slippery analogy to say it that way. It kind of implies that everything is really nothing, and that in order to find Buddhahood, we need to get rid of all of that nothing. So again, that duality isn't quite right. But in the language here, that's what it seems. And again, I will identify it for you. It isn't the thing itself we're trying to get rid of. It's our attachment to the idea of the thing as permanent, as that's our entanglement, right? It's our passion. It's our relationship to everything that is the problematic. That is created by mind. A perceptive shift. Mahamati, all things are like the horns of a hare, a horse, a donkey, or a camel, but the ignorant and simple-minded who are given up to their false and erroneous imaginations discriminate things where they are not. When we discriminate, oh, that's a chair, what our mind, our samsaric mind has done is identified chair as a forever existing, there is the chair. And I have a relationship to it. It has a relationship to me. Chair's function, chair's identity, my function. How do I use it? All of that spills in a fraction of a second into the discrimination of a chair. Because by identifying it, discriminating it means it is not that. That is not everything else. Everything else is separate from that. And all of that language manipulation is just to identify what our mind is doing, attaching itself and creating relationships with, identifying with the things that we discriminate as permanent things, things we hold, things we repel. So the revulsion that he's talking about is the revulsion, the pushing away, the distinguishing separation of the passions, those relations, as false, as our great illusory life. That's not life. That's our relationship of craving, the things, the manifestations of life. And when we push that away, everything remains, but we exist with it moment to moment rather than identifying it as separate. We all become part of the same process. And so there's a great relaxation of tensions and anxieties about the things we discriminate and identify, because that has to be maintained. That's an illusion. That's an imaginary thing. And a lot of energy goes into maintaining that. All the tendencies and conditions of our freight train of karma wants to hold on to that definition of self. But when we realize that that's part of self, everything is part of self, that self is not this. Self is a selfness. It's a suchness. And everything is a suchness of life, just as I am and my mind is. Then we become immersed in suchnesses. Just like when we do Gangyo and we talk about the 10 factors, we're describing the suchnesses of the instantiations of energy that samsara is. All of it. Oops, I got lost. What did I do now? That all things are in their self-nature unborn. Because everything is of the process. So there's no self-nature other than what we identify in our minds as a self-nature. Self-nature being that permanence, thingifying, right? Mahamadi belongs to the realm of self-realization attained by noble wisdom and does not belong essentially to the realm of dualistic discrimination cherished by the ignorant and the simple-minded. Cherished why? Because of the entanglements, the relationships. The self-nature and the characteristic marks of body, property, and abode evolve when the alaya vijnana is conceived by the ignorant as grasping and grasp. Right? Just different words for the same thing. And then they fall into a dualistic view of existence where they recognize its rise, abiding, and disappearance, cherishing the idea that all things are born and subject to discrimination as to being and non-being. Therefore, Mahamadi, you should discipline yourself therein, in self-realizing, realizing the process rather than the mire of attachments and identification, which also, because it's created or witnessed by mind, but interpreted as possession, is also described previously as the monkey mind. That all of those mental functions scream upon our identity to be. And we need to silence those monkeys. Stop letting them drive the life. And see the passions as precipitating from life, but not life itself. Manifestations of the energy, not the energy itself. Although ultimately that's what they are. But the imagination makes them born of and die into rather than understanding its energy all along. Part 20. Where are we time-wise? It's a long part. Do we want to leave that for another video? Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. Again, further, Mahamani, there are 5 groups of people, each of whom attains its own spiritual insight or mental insight. What are the 5? They are 1, the group of people whose insights belong to the Shravaka vehicle. If I could just learn everything, I would know it. Number 2, the group of people whose insights belong to the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle. I can achieve that. I have achieved that. I understand. 3, the group of people whose insights belongs to the Tathagata vehicle. Again, I can achieve a release from all of this. The Pratyeka Buddha might say that. Let's see how he distinguishes it here. 4, the group of indefinite character. And 5, the group of people to whom no insight is possible. They just fall through life. So that's what we're going to start with next. I think you have enough to think about with what we've done today. Really, really are dissecting a lot into Lankavatara, and it's easily to get kind of romantically involved with all this dissection, but that is a foible also, because then you fall in love with your discriminations, right? So, yeah, Shakyamuni is going to caution against that quite a lot, but the Lankavatara is kind of this mental exercise leading to understanding really what prajna is. But we'll see. We'll continue to dive into this tomorrow. For today, I think we've covered quite a lot of material. It may sound somewhat repetitive, but somehow if we keep approaching this same problematic with different words, different ideas, different analogies, it's my hope anyway that one of those things, if not several, will start to click and fall into place, and you'll achieve your own insights and aha moments, yeah? That's what this is all about. That's what Sangha is for. I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your support. Please, if you got anything out of this, even more questions, like the video. By all means, please subscribe. It's part of our bodhisattva behavior. It helps the algorithm bring this dialogue to more people, which is the whole reason for this channel to exist. And in the meantime, take care of your health, okay? Be kind to yourself. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.